The year is 1893. Chicago burns with light from the World's Fair, yet only a mile away, in a darkened mansion draped in velvet curtains, a ballroom stands locked. The chandeliers are still lit, the tables set, but no one enters. Guests whisper of a woman who danced alone there for days after her family had vanished. They whisper her name, Evelyn Whitford. They say she was once the crown jewel of Gilded Age Chicago society, a woman whose soirees rivaled the grandeur of European courts. But what the world did not see was the hunger behind her carefully painted smile, nor the shadows spreading through her house like a sickness. When her fortune collapsed, so did her mind, but was it madness? Or something far older, something hidden beneath the marble floors and silken drapes of her home? This is not simply the story of a woman's fall from grace. This is the story of how an entire family, an entire fortune, and perhaps an entire neighborhood were consumed by forces no one dared to name. Born in 1860, Evelyn Whitford entered the world not as a child but as a symbol. Her father, Nathaniel Whitford, had amassed staggering wealth in railroads, steel, and land speculation. The Whitford name commanded respect in Chicago, and Evelyn was raised to embody the gilded perfection of her dynasty. Tutors drilled her in French and Latin. She attended finishing schools in Boston and Paris, and by the age of 17, she was called the Pearl of Prairie Avenue. But wealth in this era was never clean. Her father's empire was built on land stripped from native tribes, on laborers crushed under collapsing scaffolds, on widows left destitute when investments failed. Evelyn was taught never to ask questions about where the gold came from. She was only told to smile, to walk with grace, and to keep her family's name untarnished. Yet neighbors would later recall her asking strange questions at the age of 12. She would stand before the Whitford mansion's portrait gallery and whisper, "Who did they bury for us to live this way?" It was an odd remark, but it was also the first fracture. The Whitford mansion on Prairie Avenue was a spectacle, a ballroom of crystal mirrors, stained, glass windows imported from Venice, and a conservatory lush with orchids. But the house had corridors that servants avoided. There were locked doors no one explained, and a cellar beneath the house that even the family rarely entered. One servant, years later, claimed that Evelyn once took her hand and led her to a section of the basement where the air was colder, heavier. She whispered, "Don't you hear it? It's breathing." Her father dismissed such remarks as girlish imagination. But the house itself carried whispers of its construction. Local rumors insisted that when the foundation was dug, the workers uncovered bones so numerous they filled carts. Some claimed they were native remains, others said paupers, but all agreed the bones were quietly reburied beneath the mansion, and so Evelyn grew up sleeping atop a field of the forgotten dead. Evelyn's adulthood was a theater of perfection. She hosted masquerades where Chicago's elite unmasked themselves in gold and feathers. European royalty visited her home. Newspapers published glowing profiles, calling her the hostess who makes Chicago feel like Vienna. But perfection was brittle. One evening in 1887, during a grand winter ball, Evelyn excused herself midway through a waltz. Witnesses claim she stumbled, her face pale, her gloved hands trembling. When her fiancé followed, he found her collapsed in a corridor, whispering, "They're still dancing in the dark. I can hear them downstairs." Her fiancé ended their engagement weeks later, citing fragility. But in Evelyn's mind, the fracture widened. The house had become a living thing. Every creak of its boards, every draft through its corridors seemed like breath. She began hosting fewer parties, retreating into the rooms no one else dared to enter. The ballroom doors stayed locked more often than open. But those who lived nearby swore they could still hear faint music at night, when no guests had been invited. By 1890, the Whitford fortune began to crumble. A railroad venture failed, a steel mill collapsed, killing 40 men, lawsuits bled the family coffers. Evelyn's father, already in failing health, died in 1891. His death certificate read apoplexy. But rumors suggested poison or madness. Suddenly, Evelyn was alone. Her brothers had died years earlier of consumption, though some whispered darker causes. Her mother retreated to Europe, leaving Evelyn as the sole Whitford heir, a woman with neither husband nor children, holding desperately onto a name that was rotting from within. The neighbors described how, in these years, Evelyn began wearing only black, wandering the halls at night with a candle, muttering in broken French and Latin. Servants fled the house one by one. By 1892, she lived there entirely alone. Yet the mansion did not grow silent. Locals claimed music still rose from the ballroom, violins, waltzes, even laughter. But when police investigated, the room was empty, the instruments untouched. The city began whispering of madness. By 1892, no servant dared to stay in the Whitford mansion. The last, a young Irish maid named Nora, told neighbors of a terrifying night when she was roused from sleep by the sound of footsteps overhead. She lit a lamp expecting to find Evelyn wandering, but when she entered the hallway, she swore the shadows were moving independently of her mistress. It was like there were 10 people, she later said, all stepping in time, but none were seen. That very week, Nora packed her belongings and fled. The Whitford mansion was left entirely unstaffed. Neighbors described Evelyn lighting her own lamps, dragging furniture across the marble floors by herself, and most disturbingly, opening the ballroom doors late at night. Witnesses swore that music followed, even though the instruments had been removed. Sometimes it was faint, sometimes deafening, but always it ended with silence and a sound that chilled every listener. A woman laughing, followed by sobbing that echoed until morning. By spring, Evelyn no longer left the house. In July of 1893, Chicago was alive with the World's Columbian Exposition, an explosion of white palaces, electric light, and human spectacle. Yet while millions flocked to the fair, Prairie Avenue whispered only of the Whitford house. A neighbor claimed she saw Evelyn standing at her window, dressed in a gown of torn lace, her hair loose, her face unrecognizable. That same week, fire broke out in the house, not once, but 3 times. Each blaze was contained before it spread, though firemen described a smell like burnt hair that lingered even where nothing had burned. One fireman, shaken, told his captain that Evelyn had met him at the door laughing, whispering, "They won't let me leave. They burn it so I'll stay." Though city officials urged her to vacate, Evelyn refused. She claimed the house was hers, her family's blood sealed in its walls, and abandoning it would mean erasing their very existence. That was when rumors spread that Evelyn was no longer alone inside. By autumn of 1893, neighbors swore that visitors were entering the Whitford mansion. Carriages would arrive at midnight, doors would slam, and shadows passed across the windows. Yet when police investigated, the house was locked, its interior coated in dust. One constable testified that he saw Evelyn at the ballroom doors, speaking to empty air as though welcoming honored guests. Then she stepped inside, the doors closing behind her. For an hour, faint violins played. When he forced the doors open, he found her standing motionless in the center of the room, surrounded by chairs set neatly for a vanished crowd. The constable resigned weeks later, claiming he still heard the music in his sleep. By now, whispers of the Whitford hauntings began circulating in Chicago society, but the elite, terrified of scandal, worked quickly to suppress the stories. Newspapers printed nothing. The mansion was quietly erased from polite conversation, as though Evelyn herself had never existed. And yet, she was still there. It was November 1893 when the story reached its darkest chapter. According to neighbors, Evelyn ordered crates of wine, casks of imported food, and barrels of candles delivered to the mansion. She instructed the grocer that she was hosting a ball that would outlast time itself. For 3 nights, music thundered from the mansion, lights blazed from every window. Some swear they saw figures moving through the curtains, hundreds of them dancing. And Evelyn, at the center of it all, her gown blood red, her arms outstretched like a queen. On the 4th morning, silence fell. The curtains remained drawn. Days passed, then weeks. No one entered, no one left. When officials finally forced open the doors, they found the ballroom exactly as if a party had ended only moments before. Glasses half full, candles still smoldering, but Evelyn Whitford was gone. The mansion stood silent through the winter of 1893. Snow piled against its doors, wind rattled its stained glass, but no one crossed the threshold. Newspapers avoided the subject entirely, but in whispers, Chicago spoke only of Evelyn. Some claimed she had been taken to an asylum, her name changed, her history buried. Others said her body was discovered in the basement, locked inside a coffin that had never been nailed shut. And some swore she never left the ballroom at all, that she still danced there, unseen, waiting for a final guest. By spring, the mansion was quietly boarded. Ownership passed to distant cousins who refused to enter. The city eventually demolished the house in 1901, clearing the land for new developments. Yet construction crews reported strange finds, charred bones beneath the foundation, dozens of them, mingled with shards of glass and scorched fabric. Officials dismissed it as refuse from the fire of 1871. But those who knew the Whitford story whispered otherwise. Evelyn Whitford was never seen again, but the mansion and the ghosts that filled it left a scar Chicago could never quite explain. In 1902, nearly a decade after Evelyn's disappearance, a thin ledger surfaced in the archives of the Illinois State Hospital for the Insane. It was unsigned, undated, but within its brittle pages appeared a name written in fading ink, Whitford E. The entry was sparse, no diagnosis, no admission date, only a note, kept in seclusion, hostile toward clergy, claims the house is still inside her. What does that mean? The house is still inside her. The handwriting itself seemed hurried, as though the recorder feared committing too much to paper. After this line, the page was torn. The rest of her file had been cut out, leaving nothing but silence. Historians who uncovered the ledger claimed officials ordered it resealed immediately. Evelyn Whitford, they insisted, had never been admitted. But the mark of her name in that book was undeniable proof that someone had tried to erase her, not only from society but from history itself. An erasure, as we know, is never clean. The Whitfords had long been patrons of St. Margaret's Episcopal Church. Its stone steeple towered above Prairie Avenue, a symbol of sanctity amidst decadence. Yet when Evelyn's collapse began, the church turned away. Why? Private correspondence between priests reveals the answer. One letter, dated December 1893, warned, "She speaks of communion not as a sacrament, but as a banquet with the dead. She invites them to her table. I will not hear her confession again." Another wrote, "The Whitford girl is not possessed. She is preserving something that was never meant to be preserved." What did they mean? What knowledge was Evelyn holding onto that terrified even the clergy? Whatever it was, the church's decision was unanimous. They denied her burial in consecrated ground, and they denied her memory a place in their records. The silence of the church was not holy, it was deliberate. Just blocks from the Whitford mansion stood the old St. Margaret's Orphan Home, a sprawling red brick building that housed hundreds of children through the late 1800s. Evelyn, in her youth, had been known to donate lavishly to the institution, furnishings, books, food. But by 1891, shortly before her descent, the donations shifted. Receipts show crates of candles, cases of wine, and casks of imported sugar delivered not to the orphanage itself, but to the Whitford mansion. Why would supplies meant for children be redirected to Evelyn's private ballroom? Former orphans gave chilling testimony decades later. One recalled being taken to the Whitford mansion during Christmas of 1889, along with a handful of other children. They were dressed in costumes, fed lavish meals, then ushered into the ballroom. He said Evelyn watched them dance until dawn, her expression rapturous and terrible. When he awoke, the children were gone. Only he remained. The orphanage kept no record of missing wards that year, but the boy insisted he had never seen his friends again. In 1920, during an estate auction, a leather-bound diary was discovered belonging to Clara Meacham, Evelyn's childhood governess. The diary was incomplete, many pages torn, entire months missing, but what remained was damning. Clara described Evelyn at age 9 as bright, gifted, but prone to visitations. She claimed Evelyn would sit for hours in the locked music room, conversing with voices no one else could hear. When Clara scolded her, Evelyn replied, "They belong to the house, they've been waiting." More chilling still was an entry dated 1872. Mr. Whitford insists the cellar remain sealed. He knows what lies beneath. He says we live upon an orchard planted with bones, and the fruit must be harvested. I do not understand him. Evelyn does. The diary ended abruptly in 1874. Clara Meacham disappeared that same year, her name never again appearing in census or parish records. Her absence was explained as a resignation, but her words suggest something far darker. To understand Evelyn Whitford's fall is to understand the trauma of an entire era. The Gilded Age was a facade, gold leaf covering rot. Every mansion was built on labor exploited, bodies buried, histories erased. Evelyn's madness was not madness alone, it was exposure. She saw, she heard, she named what others refused to acknowledge. Neighbors called her unstable, the church called her damned, the city called her forgotten, but behind each dismissal was fear. The fear that her words might be true, that the wealth of Chicago was a mausoleum, and that every chandelier gleamed with the light of stolen souls. Evelyn bore that knowledge alone, and knowledge without witness corrodes the mind. By the time her name was scratched into the Asylum ledger, she had already become something more than a woman. She was a vessel of memory, carrying within her the voices, the bones, the secrets that the Gilded Age tried so desperately to bury. And the question that remains is not what happened to Evelyn Whitford. The question is, what happened to everything she carried with her? In 1933, during a renovation of the Illinois State Hospital, a box of water-damaged patient files was uncovered. Most were destroyed, but inside lay a single photograph, its edges curling, the image nearly erased by time. It showed a woman seated in a wooden chair, her hands folded stiffly in her lap. Her eyes were vacant, her mouth drawn in a faint, unnatural smile. Behind her, the shadow of a barred window stretched across the wall. Scrawled on the back, Whitford E. 1008, 196. Experts disagreed whether it was truly Evelyn. The face was gaunt, unrecognizable, her once famous beauty stripped away. But those who examined it in person reported a detail that the camera should not have captured. Faint outlines of other faces pressed into the shadow, as though a crowd had leaned close at the moment the shutter clicked. Faces that were never there. In 1942, an elderly nurse named Margaret Hill testified to her granddaughter that she had once cared for a woman at the asylum known only as the ballroom lady. She claimed the woman never spoke during the day, but at night her voice filled the war, whispering prayers in Latin, French, and sometimes in words the nurse could not identify. She demanded candles. She demanded music, and sometimes in the dead of night the sound of violins came faintly from her room, though it was locked and empty. Margaret swore the woman's shadow did not match her body. While the patient sat hunched and motionless, the shadow on the wall swayed, lifted its arms, and spun as though dancing. The nurses begged the administration to transfer her. Instead, the orderlies bolted her door shut. She died there in 1901. Her body was buried in an unmarked grave. The records of her death were sealed. By the mid-20th century, the Whitford name had been scrubbed from Chicago's memory. Their mansion demolished, their fortune absorbed by rival dynasties, their archives sealed. No streets bore their name, no portrait hung in museums. And yet, when developers broke ground in 1950 to build apartments on the old Whitford property, their progress stalled. Workers refused to return after digging up dozens of coffins, some wooden, some stone, some nothing more than hollow shells filled with ash. City officials claimed they were remnants of a forgotten cemetery, but no records matched. Some coffins were empty, others contained bones too small to be adults. The construction was abandoned, the land was quietly sold, then re-sold until at last no one dared to touch it. It remains empty to this day. What do we make of Evelyn Whitford? Was she a victim of madness, or the lone witness to truths no one else could bear? Her story is not simply that of a woman destroyed by wealth and isolation. It is the story of America itself in the Gilded Age, a nation gilding over its sins with gold leaf, silencing those who remembered what lay beneath. Evelyn did not lose her mind. She inherited a memory of bones unearthed, of children vanished, of fortunes bought with blood. She carried it until it consumed her because no one else would. And so the locked ballroom is more than a story of haunting. It is a symbol, A room filled with music no one admits hearing, a party no one confesses attending. The Whitford mansion may be gone, but the ballroom remains, not in wood or stone, but in every institution that thrives on silence, every fortune that grows from forgotten graves. There is one last note. In 1963, a historian researching the World's Columbian Exposition visited the Chicago Historical Society to examine archives. Late at night, alone in the microfilm room, he opened a file marked Whitford Papers Restricted. Inside were letters Evelyn had written in her final years. Her script was erratic, but one line repeated across every page: "The dead dance still, and when the music stops, the living will join them." The historian refused to finish his research. He returned the file, resigned his position, and vanished from academia. But before he left, he told a colleague something chilling. He said that while reading the letters, he heard faint violins, not from the building, not from the street, but from behind him, inside the locked cabinets. The Whitford story is not history, it is an inheritance, and perhaps if you listen closely enough tonight, you will hear it too. The faintest music, the turning of feet across a wooden floor, the echo of laughter that has no source. The ballroom is never empty, it is only waiting.